Okay.
Okay, good morning. I'd like to call this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, Tuesday, March 25th, 2025 to order. Okay. Do we still have to ask who everyone is here? I guess I'll do that.
Yes, and you have to say that it's being recorded.
Okay, this meeting is being recorded. Sorry, I'm a little behind this morning. For all who are present, Gary Beller.
Here.
Dave Iverson.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Doug Rose.
Here.
Christy Kickham.
Here.
Jen Carberg.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
Okay, and staff, Leah Hill.
Here.
Oh, I forgot you, Rachel. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Here.
Vince Murphy.
Here. Bob is staff too.
Okay, and Bob Bistreski, is that correct? You there, Bob?
Yeah, but
there,
Bob's here. Sorry about that. Yeah,
Is that right, Bistreski?
that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, and Chuck Larson.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Okay, I'm going to read our little message in the beginning. Good morning. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all devices and phones. For items with public comment, after committee members have finished their discussion on an agenda item, the chair will afford members of the public up to 3 minutes to speak. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their name and any affiliations. To give public comment, you must be recognized by the chair and speak through the chair. There is to be no crosstalk with others in the attendance. In the interest in efficient use of our time, please speak through the chair. To be recognized for making a public comment, use the raised hand feature by clicking on the reaction tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and that reaction tab has a little heart over it. When you finish your comment, please click the lower hand button. It's important for me to note that CRAC isn't required by law to take public comment. We do so because we need your invaluable input. We view public comment as a privilege, so please remain respectful in your comments and not spare to others or members of this committee. I need to find the agenda. I'm sorry, everybody. Just give me a minute. While I'm looking for the agenda, we'll take any public comment. Has nothing to do with this agenda. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak?
Yes. I'd
Yes,
like
who?
to speak.
Who is that talking?
Jerry Connick.
Okay, you get 3 minutes, Jerry.
Okay, two questions.
Okay,
Two
hold on, Mr. Connick. Your comments cannot have anything to do with today's agenda. You understand?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two things. First, I was wondering if you guys had anything to do with Article 75, adding the word resilience to the CONCAB warrant article that they're trying to change and add resilience. The second thing, I'm looking for an update on the Coastal Resilience District. Mr. Murphy has promised one over the time. I'd like to know if we could have one available by the May 13th meeting. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Okay.
I hope you understood what I meant.
Yes, and it's great to put a face to your name, Mr. Connick, so thanks for doing that. Okay, so approval of the minutes, January 14th, 2025 and January 28th, 2025.
Forgive me,
I'll take 'em.
Peter.
Vincent,
I hate to interrupt. I can very simply answer one of Jerry's questions straight off.
okay, go ahead, Vince.
Thank you. Jerry mentioned something about coastal resilience districts being on the town warrant article for this May. It's not. The article's been, there's no article for coastal resilience districts. I don't know where he got this idea from. I'm sorry. We talked about it. It didn't make it onto the article. That's a town manager question.
I'm thinking, Vince, that at previous meetings, I may have asked Leah, you know, if, or maybe asked you if we had anything that was going to be on town meeting, and maybe Mr. Connick picked it up that way. Sorry for the miscommunication, Mr. Connick.
No, it's actually written right now on Article 75. Resilience is being added to section 136-2. Sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Chairman, but you guys, I thought you guys probably put it in there.
And what is, Vince, what's article, did you say 72 or 75?
75.
What is that article, Vince?
I don't know. I can open it up now, but I'm not familiar with it. It's not one I have on my radar. And all I was talking about was the Coastal Resilience District part of his question, not
Right.
anything to do with Article 75. I have no idea what Article 75 is at this time.
Oh, it's just the word resilience being added, and it looks like it's being snuck in for some reason, along with some two other changes to the wording, and I was just wondering about it. I'm sorry to bother you gentlemen with this, but
I can answer.
Go ahead, Vince.
This is the town's wetland bylaw, chapter 136. If you can't have resilience in wetlands, I don't know if we should even exist.
And with that, Vince, I will say, Mr. Connick, there may be instances in many articles and things that are written in the town where the word resilience needs to be inserted. I know that we can't track every single time that happens. I have a feeling that you will do that for us. And if you'll bring that to our attention at meetings, then we'll get explanations for you.
thank you.
That sound good?
Thank you.
Okay. You all set?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are there any other public comments? Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes. It's Matt.
Okay, Matt. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thanks, Gary. Any discussion? No, okay, roll call vote. Gary Beller,
Aye.
David Iverson,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Doug Rose.
A couple of typos, but I'm an aye.
Okay, Christy Kickham,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman.
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay, Tim Brain.
Sorry for the typos, but aye.
Okay, and Matt, since he made a motion,
Yep.
is all set. And the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
no disrespect was intended to my brother, Tim Brain, on that one. Just wanted you to know I am reading them, okay? That's it.
I'm glad somebody is.
As a secretary for two boards, I can say that it is wonderful to find out that people are reading the minutes. So I'll take those edits as a compliment. Okay, so presentation on Easy Street flooding events and projections by Chuck Larson, Town of Nantucket Manager of Strategic Projects.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will share my screen. No, it's been a few years since I've had the opportunity to talk to the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. A lot of familiar faces, several new faces. And I've been with the town 8 years now. I guess earlier in my career, I was heavily involved in the coastal resilience side of things. And still near and dear to my heart. I took on a project related to PFAS, which has been all consuming, but hopefully we're getting resources, so I'll have a little bit more time to participate in projects like this with the coastal resilience plan. So essentially, this is an update to some of my earlier work. And the theme is really, with 60 years of data, what can the past tell us about the future? And some of my earlier work that was brought to the committee, presentations and some reports doing with some of the flooding that occurred on Easy Street, and then early analysis of data available from the tide gauge. And some of my earlier work really looked at, the past 35 years. But what's unique here is actually having all the data for, a complete data set of 60 years. So I'll be sharing that information with you, and also some of the statistical analysis, exceedance analysis, also really focusing in on looking at the data in 19-year epochs to average out some of the tidal harmonics, residuals, climate effects. So this is, raw, unfiltered data, very, statistically sound. NOAA validates this data before they publish it. So it's actually really good data to work with. And what comes apparent is, looking at the data, is where we have an acceleration of flooding frequencies as sea levels rise. And so I have some graphics to help, explain that. But, tried and true, this is very similar to a chart that NOAA publishes on their website. What's been the change in local mean sea levels over the years? And very simple regression analysis. You can see that we're increasing at about 0.0136, feet per year, 0.8 of a foot in 60 years, or approximately 10 inches. That's the trend that's, with the data now. You do notice there's some interesting, variation year to year in the average, in the mean sea levels, almost 0.2 of a foot at times. And there's certainly something going on toward the upper end of the curve here. We don't know if that's going to bounce back to the mean or what, but it's interesting to kind of look at this, how it does bounce around the trend line. This is very similar to some of the graphs I've shown before. The data that goes back, earlier than 1980 just shows a very consistent trend of frequency in this water level of 1.1 feet mean high water. And that's water that essentially starts to cover Easy Street at Oak Street, curb to curb, to a depth about 1 inch. Maybe early stage of, really nuisance flooding, but it's a readily observable water level, and hence, was something that was established just for tracking and reporting. And very clearly, you see a trend up until about 2000. There is, a consistent, just low level, 8-10 years, 8 to 10, flooding days per year, and then something takes off. Non-linearly increase. And if you look overall, it's a factor of 10 to what we're seeing now in 2024. The horizontal bars are 5-year averages to help, quantify some of the trends that we're seeing. If we look at the NOAA established threshold, which is specific to the Nantucket tide gauge of 1.8 feet mean high water, very similar trend, but much smaller frequencies of exceedance. Not a well-defined pattern, but you do see some changes, albeit less dramatic. And it, again, just simple math. It is about a factor of 10, but it's not as clear or, as pronounced, I think, is the 1.1 feet flooding threshold. And at this water level, you're starting to see water, maybe appearing at the catch basins on Washington Street, several inches of flooding maybe on Easton Street and Brant Point, and then also water, coming over the boat ramp at Children's Beach. So definitely a higher water level, less frequent as we've been seeing, which makes sense. And then I think one of the things I wrestled with early on is that, why is there a disconnect? Why are we seeing a nonlinear, very clear nonlinear trend with a high tide flooding frequency, but more of a gradual, constant linear trend with mean sea level? Kind of a head scratcher. If you've read ahead and you've looked at the presentation, the answer is there. But, going into this work, this was, kind of one of the puzzles, I wrestled with. And, this is nothing I discovered. This is a phenomenon that was identified and reported by NOAA. I just essentially picked up on, the methodology they used and then just dropped in Nantucket's tide gauge data to really try to understand it more myself. So the analysis I did really focuses on the water elevation that's really the daily higher high water. And that's essentially, Nantucket is semi-diurnal tides. There are 2 high water levels. This is the higher of the 2 in each day. So it's each day's maximum water level. And it's the water level that's used to compute mean higher high water, which is the tidal datum that NOAA generates over their defined national tidal epic. So, very consistent in terms of tying it, to that metric or that datum, mean higher high water. And mean higher high water is also essentially what's used when we talk about high tide flooding. It's the additional water that you would tend to see over and above a high tide. And that, in this analysis, 1 hour of daily higher high water is considered an exceedance for the day. You could have multiple hours above that threshold and analyze, count the number of hours, and that would be the duration of flooding. I did not do that. I'm just looking at the number of days that, boom, we went over that level. So, as I mentioned earlier, assembled the data into epochs of 19 years. I developed histograms to show the distribution of the daily higher high water level. We're going to be able to see some notable changes due to the increases in, local mean sea level. Looked at the thresholds and how they intersect with those distributions, can quantify the flooding days, from that information, and then just some of the, exceedance probabilities that I'll show with the curves in the graphics that follow. This is just some of the raw statistics that you'll see in the later slides demonstrated graphically. 3 epochs, those are the time ranges, epoch 1, 2, and 3. There's a midpoint year of the epoch that usually is a reference point for the data within that epoch. In terms of the number of records with elevation data available for analysis, very, very high, percentages, especially in the later years. Computed the mean, higher high water elevations, and these are referred to with the Nantucket station datum. You probably haven't seen this reference before. It's a reference that's really time independent. It exists for the tide station, it'll never change. Whereas some of the references that we have for the datums will change over time. Certainly, the datums tied to the tidal epoch mean sea level and so forth get updated every 19 or 20 years, so those change. The geodetic datums are set to change as well, such as NAVD 88. And the research that I've been seeing lately has referred to the tide station datums as that consistent measure that will be in existence, 50, 100 years from now, so that there's no confusion when I say mean high water. What the epoch am I referring to? Change in water levels, the rate of change. You can see certainly there's sea level increase that's shown with the data in the epochs, nearly half a foot between epochs 1 and 3, standard deviation, variance, things like that. And then also looking at the mean sea level, which I could compute from the hourly records as well. That's not exciting. What's exciting is really, looking at some of the graphics here. So these are 3 histograms of the data, the high water elevation data. And if you're familiar with, histograms, this is, pretty straightforward, but the histogram shows how frequently the elevation on the x-axis was recorded in the epoch. And the values on the x-axis, start at 4.5 feet and go up to 9 feet, with the elevation referred to on the tide station data. And the values on the x-axis are in bins of 1/10 of a foot. And the y-axis is simply referencing the number of days in the epoch at that elevation as a percentage of the days in the epoch. And an epoch has 6,940 days. So at the top of the graph there, 10% represents 694 days. And you can see clearly, we have, the shape of a bell curve. It's symmetric around the mean at the center. The standard deviation, which I mentioned, previously, indicates the spread of the data, 2 standard deviation, 95% of the values fall within that range. And that's plus or minus a foot around the mean. And so with the 3 histograms, you can notice a kind of a progression, a movement, from left to right. And that's really reflected by, the change in local mean sea level that's moving those histograms to higher elevation. And I show the mean for each histogram at the top, for reference. But certainly we've had more of an increase between epochs 2 and 3 than 1 to 2. But what's most interesting is, the tail of the curve to the right, where it intersects and now surpasses those flooding thresholds. And so for me, that was an aha moment. That's telling us essentially, the bars to the right, the area of the histogram to the right of that flooding threshold, represents the total number of days of exceedance. And what we're seeing is a clear pattern, epoch to epoch, and you can kind of do this in smaller increments, even year to year, that we're constantly moving into and then surpassing those flooding thresholds. And what we're seeing with the increase in frequency is where we are on the side of that, distribution curve. And so, that begins to tell the story. But I have a better way to kind of show this, but with a cumulative, frequency curve. And that's essentially a running total of all percentages, from high to low elevation in the histogram. And 3 epochs, 3 curves. There's also a hypothetical epoch that you see there. I'll get to that in a second. But just like the histograms, each epoch, each cumulative frequency curve does shift toward higher elevations at the right. And the amount of shift is, again, the amount of local sea level rise. And similar to the histogram, you notice a larger portion of the tail section of the curve that's intersected and then above this flooding threshold. And, using the graph, you can essentially, read off the information for the epoch, for the epoch number 3, 10% of the days, at or above the water level of 1.1 feet. That's 694 days. If we go back to slide 5, which I showed earlier, if you add up the last 19 years, you'll come up with 736. There we go. That seems to validate, the trend that we're seeing, and we can, understand that, the reason we're seeing that is this change in distribution as it intersects with this flooding threshold. Same kind of thing can be done for the NOAA threshold of 1.8 feet mean higher high water. But I think what's more interesting with this graph is understanding that a cumulative frequency curve, the slope of the curve, is very important. And essentially the slope starts at 0 or near 0, and at the right side of the graph along the x-axis, and then starts to go and gain increasing slope up to where you have essentially maximum slope and a linear portion of the curve, then decreasing slope, and then it comes tangent to the top of the chart, essentially then going back to no slope. So the slope of the curve at any point represents the rate of change in exceedance frequency during the epoch. Like I mentioned, this linear portion is the steepest. This is where you'll have the largest increase in frequency over the epoch, and also, year to year. But it's really this portion of the curve here where it's concave up, where you have this non-linear, almost exponential increase. And it's this portion of the curve, when it intersects with a flooding threshold, that things really change rapidly. And that has been identified by NOAA as the transition phase, or tipping point at which high tide flooding will begin this rapid nonlinear acceleration. And that's certainly what we saw at this flooding threshold over the last 20 years at 1.1 feet mean higher high water. So what we're going to be seeing is something very similar to 1.8 feet mean higher high water. And the hypothetical epoch is simply taking the last epoch we had and extending it, just copying it, copy and paste, same amount of sea level, very conservative. We're probably going to be looking at higher levels of sea level rise going forward. But anyhow, it shows that during the next epoch, which is essentially what we're in now, 2025 to 2043, we're going to start seeing entering that transition zone there. And, these are some of the trends that we saw again in slide 5 and slide 6. And what we see here probably for this, NOAA threshold is, changes are going to be happening at a faster rate. But essentially everything that we saw in this slide here is going to be the pattern that we see begin here, in the sense that in terms of the frequencies, we're at 10 or 12 events per year, but, we're going to be seeing, again, the same kind of changes, the same amount, of inundation, but at this higher flooding threshold. So that gives us a better sense of, some of the timing that we're going to be looking at for changes, especially at that higher flooding threshold. And I think nicely, this helps tell the story, what we're going to be seeing in the future based on the past data. That's really, the key message that, I wanted to share with you, based on data at the tide gauge right at our, front door, so to speak. Few more slides. This is another way of visualizing the data that I've presented. If you've been on the tide gauge website, you can see the graphs of water levels and what they forecast and what the actuals are over time. This is just a sample day that I grabbed with a screenshot. 24-hour period. You've got 2 high level water levels. You've got a daily higher high water, you have the daily lower high water. The daily higher high water is the water level that I would analyze. And to scale, I have inserted the distribution of values for the last epoch. And what this tells us is that during the last 19 years, all the water levels fluctuated. The daily higher high water level fluctuated in this range as it was recorded. There are times when it exceeded this threshold here of 1.1, fewer times at 1.8. This is probably the best way to try to understand the data as it pertains to, you know, water levels and sea levels as they rise and fall. And in this particular example, I didn't plan it this way, but this particular water level for the day at 6 feet, you know, elevation at the tide station datum is at the very, you know, lower end of the elevations in the distribution, you know, kind of unusually low, but, you know, that's, you know, how tides, you know, change over time. Very low probability of occurrence, but it does fall, you know, it statistically it has to fall within this range because that's, you know, this is the data I use to assemble it. And clearly there's, you know, kind of a mean point in this distribution, you know, 7 feet. This is, again, for this epoch of 2006 to 2043. This is 2006 to 24. Yep, that's right. And, you know, these values here actually represent the past epoch used by NOAA, the official, you know, tidal epoch, for identifying these, you know, datum elements, mean higher high water, which actually is at, you know, 6.57 feet tide station datum. So when NOAA releases their updated epoch, we're going to show about 0.4 of an increase in mean higher high water. That's kind of an early preview in terms of what we might see come out of NOAA when they finally publish that based on, you know, our tide station data. But this was a graphic I put together. It was kind of last week as I was thinking about this presentation, how to really visualize it in the context of the tide gauge and, you know, the analysis I did statistically here. So I hope that's helpful. So I just have a few more slides to go. Just some, you know, obvious takeaways. You know, high tide flooding is occurring and it's going to, you know, continue to increase, you know, rapidly as local sea levels rise. We're in the acceleration phase of the frequency for the frequency of increase for the threshold of 1.1 feet, 1.8 feet. You know, we're going to be entering that acceleration phase, that transition phase. You know, we're probably in it now, but certainly we're going to see more evidence of that in the next 10 years. Despite, you know, the obvious, you know, overland inundation, you know, really it's, you know, as sea levels rise and high tide, you know, levels rise, soil saturation will increase. There's just going to be less ability of the ground to absorb water at lower elevations, you know, more frequent deeper ponding, weaker soil strengths. You know, I think that's some of what we're starting to see in Brant Point. Just again, low ground, higher water levels, and just that water not having anywhere to go. Even in the drainage system, there's just not enough difference in elevation to really drain it. And yeah, one of the challenges we have, and we heard some of those comments last week at the presentations on the downtown flood barrier, is that, you know, Nantucket is sandy soil, very permeable. Water's, you know, almost certainly to seep around any kind of a you know, barrier. You know, even if it's, you know, deep, you know, water just tends to travel from high to low elevation. Just some notes to share with you. The work that I've done actually has been put together in a technical paper, and I'm planning to publish it. I just need to complete some of the analysis of the variance, some of the changes in the standard deviation between tidal epochs. Want to just kind of nail that down for the report. Certainly, you know, there's more work that can always be done with data. Some of it's really, you know, looking at the duration, flooding hours, you know, per year, and then look at what are some of the seasonal trends. You know, these events tend to cluster in months, what months, and how does that intersect with the population on the island? You know, there'd be some interesting work there. And then certainly if there are other elevations or, you know, locations where you'd want to get a sense of where we start to enter that transition phase, that's, you know, easily done with some of the curves that, you know, I've already developed. And, you know, this is the kind of analysis that can be done with the tide station data. I'm sure there'll always be more, but, you know, I think it's an incredible resource for the town and the community. So, you know, I think there's opportunities to continue to use this into the future. And kind of a last but parting note is that I did mention there are going to be updates to the, you know, computation of the datum with a new national tidal datum epic that NOAA is finalizing. And same thing, there's going to be a change to the geodetic datum. NAVD 88 is going to be superseded as well. And, you know, that's probably one of the reasons why I stepped back to using the tide station datum, because that'll be consistent over time and you can always carry it to the new datums as they get released. And that essentially, you know, wraps up my presentation. Just one parting slide is, you know, fitting the, you know, mean sea level trend to a quadratic equation, which is something the Army Corps of Engineers does and NASA does. It gives you a very good fit. I think that the takeaway here is, although we tend to show mean sea level change trending to be linear, it is really a non-linear and, you know, probably increasing more in the future as we go ahead. I'm not, you know, discussing anything in terms of future scenarios for sea level rise. Just again, kind of a retrospective look at the data we have, providing some insights and hopefully some information, you know, that's helpful to the Coastal Resilience Committee. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Doug, you had your hand up earlier. Did you have something you wanted to add or ask?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think Chuck got around to pretty much answering all the questions I had. There was a slide, I don't remember which number it was, where he's showing the, keep going there, Chuck, there, right there. One more forward.
Yes.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. Thank you, Chuck. I just want to make sure I was interpreting the black line correctly, in that what we're looking at here is the data cumulatively for an entire epoch. And what we're seeing in more recent data, say the past 5 years, would be to the right of that black line. So we're already migrating toward the green dotted line, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Each year that line is stepping closer and closer,
Yeah.
you know, shifting to the right. So
Yeah.
these are just distinct steps in time with the
Yeah.
19 years of data behind it to
Got it.
you know, to accommodate
just
for
doing-
variations, you know, that we see.
And just doing, and thank you, perfect. And just doing the stupid math in my head, if 10% of days are beyond that 1.1 foot flood level, basically it's 36 days a year on average ish. And what we're saying is that within the next epoch, we're going to be seeing an average that's closer to almost 30%. So call it, I can't do the math. It'll be 100 days.
Yeah.
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 100 days a year where there will be some kind of nuisance flooding.
Yep.
At minimum. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. That was great work.
Yeah, no, the center point of that future epic is 2035. So, you know, 10 years, you know, on average, you're going to be looking at that, and it could be even sooner. And, you know, so this just reflects the urgency of which, you know, hey, planning and, you know, taking action. Otherwise, you're going to be working underwater. And God, you know, that just means a larger scope, more cost, longer schedule.
Thank you, Chuck. Go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you. Great presentation, Chuck. A couple of questions, or really things that I heard that I want to confirm that I'm interpreting properly. Right. So the first thing is, you're saying that the sea level rose 10 feet over the past 60 years.
Now, let's go back to that. So I said it rose 0.82 feet in 60 years, or 10 inches.
10 inches. Yep.
Yeah, that's a significant change. I'm glad you asked.
Yep.
Indeed.
Well, because in the coastal resilience plan, I think one of the confusion that people have had is been mistaking and confusing feet and inches.
Oh,
And
gosh.
so I wanted to understand that very clearly.
Yes, thank you. Great.
And then I looked at in the difference between the second and third epoch, right?
Yeah.
So that's because really that's when it increased. So is it
Yeah.
5 inches, 6 inches between those two?
So, yeah, so it's 4.4 inches,
Okay. So
say 4.5 round numbers.
okay.
And you do notice that the difference between, kind of epic 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 is
Yep.
it's a doubling
Yep.
in the, in the increase. And you see that in the graphs too. There's kind of a step and then a big step as it shifts to the right.
Right. And so the other thing is that in the current coastal resiliency plan that we have right now, it basically says that by 2030, there'll be 50 days a year that we'll have this major flooding. And so essentially your work has confirmed that.
Yeah, you're getting close to that, and of course, the coastal resilience plan assumes a more aggressive amount of sea level rise.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last question is, where are you hoping to publish this?
So there are some, coastal journals
Mhm.
that I'd like to, submit it to, kind of peer review. I don't have anything specific, but, some people have made recommendations. But I think since you brought up, I'm also looking for reviewers that would be interested in reviewing and comment on the first draft that I have. The more eyes that I get on it, the better the paper gets. But it's essentially the information I've presented here, but in words, it's written to be something that's more on the non-statistical side, so more people can understand it. I don't go into any of the harmonic analysis that you see with a lot of coastal papers. So it's written to kind of an audience that would be interested in learning about this, but without having to, go through a lot of the technical information that gets presented in a lot of these papers. And, I think what's, most fascinating for me, it's the data that's right here on Nantucket.
Yep.
And was just, available. And I think, the initiative for this is having 60 years of data, and it just tells a great story. So I kind of think that's what's kind of pushed me to kind of wrap this up and, publish it. And yeah, hopefully somebody will pick it up and, take it for the next 60 years, that kind of thing.
Well, thank you and well done.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chuck, and thanks, Joanna, for the questions. Go ahead, Gary. You're on mute, Gary.
Great. Thanks, Chuck. Interesting presentation. I think this presentation would be a little difficult for the public to understand. But it's fabulous that you're able to do that. And the fact that it's going to help us confirm what we have been trying to make clear to the public, that this is going to affect their lives. So let's just talk about what Joanna said, and that you talked about, which is what happens in 2030. That's only 5 years away, not even a full 5 years anymore. And when we say there's going to be flooding approximately 50 days a year, we're not just talking about, the question I have is, are we able to be comfortable in saying that on these 50 days, those trucks won't be going down Easy Street or Washington Street because the level of flooding will make those roads impassable? Or are we just talking about some slight uncomfortable water levels? To the extent that it stops commerce completely, 50 days a year is a lot. And it could be a little worse as well. So should we feel comfortable about making that clear when we talk to the public about the reason that we have to take steps sooner rather than later? How about that?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. So, certainly this is, something there's no one, right answer. But certainly the threshold that, I used for 1.1 feet is really wet feet, right? It's just beginning to show a problem. Cars are driving through an inch or two of water. It's not going to stop commerce, but certainly as you get to maybe 4 or 5 inches, some cars probably shouldn't drive through that if they have low clearance, or maybe electric vehicles, that kind of thing. And then you're getting saltwater exposure and so on and so forth. But, it's probably something closer to the 1.8 feet that you would be closing the road. 8 inches of water on Easy Street would definitely, except for the largest of vehicles, so identifying what that water level is that, would, stop the use of Easy Street. I think, that's a good item to develop, have a consensus what that is. But, the literature I've read, and I do quote some of that in the paper, is closer to that 4-inch range, where you would consider it, impassable for cars. Again, just, for the lower cars, but hey, some cars can go through 4 inches, and, that's certainly possible. But yeah, I did not necessarily get into that, but you could go right down between 1.1 and 1.8, and, that would be the threshold, that you'd be, selecting to close the road.
I have further information on that if you'll accept it.
Yes, yeah.
Well, through the chair, of course.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, go ahead, Vince, and then I have a question or two.
Thank you. So over the years, I've spoken to the police department about this, and their view on this, or at least under the previous chief, was very simplistic. They wanted to look at the lowest common denominator of sorts. Their view on this was that you don't think about if an articulated truck can make it through, or a big raised Ford F-150 or whatever it happens to be. They just think about it in terms of a normal car. If a normal, regular car can't make it through, then it would likely block the road anyway. So you close the road before that happens. That happens to be around 4 to 4 inches or so, sometimes upwards of 5. But they don't think of it in terms of, okay, a bigger truck can make it through. Well, you can't let the road open in that circumstance and then just direct cars away. They close it when it gets to about 4 inches or so, and that's it. That's when the barriers go up and all traffic is redirected.
Yeah, thank you for that, Vince. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Number one, the slides at the end where you summarize, can Crack and can Leah Hill use this? This kind of goes to what Gary was saying, and I'm not a math person at all, and I can't read graphs, and I understand maybe a quarter of what you're saying. I get it, but when we want to talk to the public, do we refer to this slide here, takeaways? When we want to respond to what people are saying about our next discussion, which will have to do with the Easy Street Flood Mitigation Project, and people have questions, and we want to say, well, Chuck Larson says this is his data. We can provide you with that data, but we need the distilled version. So is that this right here?
Yes, I'll share the paper with you, which, probably, speaks in more detail to some of these, thresholds and phases, acceleration phase. But, this is essentially the summary with the emphasis on the saltwater intrusion, but you've certainly got the impacts to transportation, which are also a major issue as well. So there's a lot more to add to this slide that's available, probably in the paper. But yes, by all means, feel free to use this. That's why it's here, to help support, the urgency and the need for these projects going forward.
And so in my business guiding people, we talk about this topic all the time when we go to places like Smith's Point. And it's amazing how many people have seen that movie The Day After Tomorrow and have taken it as the gospel and believe that that's what's going to happen, and it's going to happen overnight, and it's all going to be over. And You know, it's what some people are thinking. You know, they don't drill down as much as you do or as much as we have. So it's important that we can, I don't know, let them down easy, I guess, you know, and be able to, I guess what we need is a fact sheet that's longer than this. And then my question was the tide gauge. How does the tide gauge react? The data, is that based on an average of conditions over a period of 12 months? You know, mostly flat, calm conditions. What happens when you have storm surge of 7-8 feet? Like when you had the storm, what is it, 2017 or 2018, whenever the we had the sewer main break in front of Cook's Cafe. And we have let's say everything lines up. We have a full moon or a new moon, and we have a storm. And then you get the high tides and the storm surge. What's the tide gauge reading?
The tide gauge is reading your still water level inside a tube. So it does fluctuate, you know, with water levels. It does not include wave height, but it uses, you know, several types of sensors. You know, they have they have backup sensors, but it's an acoustical sensor that measures the distance to the water surface, and then they've got algorithms that, you know, check and process that. So, you know, the data is, I forget what the sampling frequency is, but the data is available, you know, in increments of 6 minutes. And then, you know, it gets averaged to hourly. And so the data I downloaded was essentially the hourly data over 60 years. And that, you know, was the water levels that I used. But, you know, the gauge will, you know, measure the range of water levels, you know, continuously over time, and just, you know, store that data. And yeah, NOAA reviews it before it gets published, but they do show the predicted astronomical tides and water elevations, and then also the unverified water levels, which you can pretty much find real time if you go to the web page and pull it up.
And so I think for a lot of people, the tide gauge in their mind is the kids in the canoe down in front of Broad Street when the water is up. Yeah. So it's extremely helpful when we have a regular sunny day and the tide is up on the street, and Leah goes out and shoots that and posts it so that people see that it doesn't take wind and a storm to make the water come into the streets. So Go ahead, Doug.
Thanks again, Peter. I'm sorry to chime in again. I just had a real quick question. Chuck, can I assume that you are completely apprised to the work that Arcadis has been working on as far as okay, great. And I assume their work has been informed by your data. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, I've been sharing information with Leah, and I've been participating in that in the past, and certainly very important work, very near and dear to my heart too. So happy to help in any extent, you know, I can going forward.
All right, Chuck, thank you. Thank you, Doug. Are there any other questions? Are there any members of the public that have any questions? Here. Okay, seeing no questions and no more comments. Thank you very much, Chuck. It's very, very enlightening for all of us, even for those of us who don't fully understand it. And thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Feel free to come back anytime if you have something to share with us, even if it's something small, you think that we should know it. Get a hold of Leah or reach out to me.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Presentation and discussion on the Easy Street Flood Mitigation Project by Leah Hill.
Thanks, Peter. And thank you, Chuck, for giving that great information to segue into this project. Can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, great. So today I'm going to talk about the feasibility study and design for flood mitigation on Easy Street. This presentation is pretty much the same that was given last week at our virtual open houses. So the intention of today presenting to CRAC is to, if you weren't able to go to the virtual open houses or the select board meeting, is to update you on the Easy Street Flood Mitigation Project and then get feedback from you all about the different design options. I'm not asking CRAC to vote on which one you think should go forward. What will happen there is once we get all of the feedback from the community open house, from you all, other stakeholders, that will be compiled and synthesized, and then the staff will put a recommendation towards the select board. Okay, so again, I just mentioned that we had this last week. We had 2 identical sessions in the morning and in the evening. And in the morning, we had about 60 participants, and at night, we had about 30. So it was a great turnout from the community. We had some good feedback and discussions, and it was interactive. So there were questions asked throughout the presentation, and people could answer them anonymously. And then we had breakout sessions where the community could ask specific questions about the designs and, just clarifying questions and give more feedback on them. And the recording is up on the project's website, which is the QR code here, or you can go to www.nantucket-ma.gov/Easy Street. There is a feedback survey that is still open. It'll close tonight at 8 p.m. So if you want to give more, in-depth feedback, please take that survey. Okay, so the project team, I am the project manager for it. We've got Vince and Jeff Carlson, Greg Tivenin, Chuck Larson, Holly Backus, and Florencia Rulo for the town staff. And then Arcadis, they are the primary consultants. So Bill, Trevor, and Michelle are the main staff that have been helping us with this project. And the sub-consultants are Woods Hole Group, One Architecture, and Childs Engineering. Okay, so you're all pretty familiar with the project site, but it is outlined in this this dash box here, primarily Easy Street and then Broad Street going into Steamboat Wharf. The goals are, we have 3 main goals: to develop a feasible project to mitigate stormwater and coastal flood risk along Easy Street. And it should be noted that this project is to reduce flood risk. It's not to eliminate flood risk. So during certain storm events, there still will be water on the road. The second goal is to inclusively engage the Nantucket community and stakeholders island-wide in the design development process, which we have been doing. We've hosted 2 virtual open houses and then have presented at different boards and committees. And to seek co-benefits that improve access, mobility, and the environment as part of the design development process. We're all familiar with these 2 pictures of this area flooding. So for the project timeline, we are at the tail end of this phase of the project. Again, it's funded by a Office of Coastal Zone Management grant that we got in 2024, and 2 tasks have already been completed, which were the existing conditions and flood risk assessment, and then the feasibility alternative assessment. Community engagement has been throughout the whole process, and right now we're in task 4, is to really hone down and take the conceptual designs and move one of them to 30% design. So our grant ends June 2025. So we've got a couple months left, and the deliverable for that will be the preferred alternative to 30% design within a design package, and information on how to move that design forward and different funding options that we can pursue. Just as a reminder, this is the first phase, the Easy Street project, and the Coastal Resilience Plan is the first phase of the overall downtown neighborhood flood barrier. So if you guys remember, you voted that this is the highest priority recommendation to start because of the criticality of the road and the vulnerability of the road as well. And then just to put it into context, the black square down here, that's the Francis Street Beach Improvement Project. So there's essentially two sections of that overall downtown neighborhood flood barrier that is moving forward. You know, they're in the planning phases. The whole build out of the downtown neighborhood flood barrier concept, the implementation year for that is 2050, and that really relies on working with private property owners and public infrastructure to work together to be able to protect our downtown to reduce flood risk. Again, I mentioned these two reports are on the project's website if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the flood assessment and the feasibility study. Okay, so this basically tells what Chuck just explained to us. So using the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model that has been overlaid onto this map, the dark blue is mean higher high water tidal flooding. So you can see Easy Street, Oak Street, Broad Street. This is really what we're seeing during sunny day flooding, that these areas are already flooding. So if you think about what we are already seeing today for sunny day flooding, that is what people say is what will be the tides of, you know, in the near future. The medium tone blue is tidal extents as soon as 2050, and then the lighter blue are tidal extents as soon as 2070. Through this, Arcadis used a method, and they figured out that from now through 2070, the cumulative expected losses from coastal flooding can total up to $1.2 billion for this project site. So that's a significant increase if you think about the overall risk assessment that was done in 2020, that the damages and losses from tidal flooding is 3.4 billion. So for this little area, 1.2 billion. That's if we take no action. So we had 4 initial concepts that are on here. These were presented to you before, and these were presented at the first open house at the Whaling Museum in the summer for the community feedback. I'm not going to go into details about that. The general themes that we heard from that open house when we shared those concepts were that there was a broad support for addressing flooding issues on Easy Street. There were lots of concerns for stormwater flooding during heavy rain events, in addition to tidal flooding. There were desires to incorporate nature-based solutions into the design, and there was interest in exploring new alternatives, including a raised Easy Street. So to get into the stormwater aspect of it, this blue area outlined here is the watershed for Easy Street. So it's quite large. It's about 53 acres, and it really is pretty much all impervious surface. So the water rushes down the hill and consolidates here at Easy Street to cause that stormwater flooding. The project aims to propose solutions to reduce some flooding on Easy Street that is caused by stormwater. So some of the options are to replace the existing duct bills on outfalls with functioning check valves or tide gates. For green storage areas, so if we can find areas within the watershed where we could kind of slow down the water, have it accumulate uphill rather than rushing straight down to this area. And then pretty much with each option, there's going to have to be a pump station. So to pump that stormwater out and away from this area. The greater downtown watershed options are, again, to redirect the flow to other outfalls, to reduce impervious areas, and retain stormwater upstream. Okay, so I will be talking about some different levels of protection when we get into the design alternatives. So the lowest area on Easy Street is right here, the existing surface. That's about 2.5 feet. The existing bulkhead, the town bulkhead, is about 6-ish feet. Just a minute there. Okay. And then, so there's the proposed road raising, which I'll get into, is 6.5 feet. And then there's another alternative that's at 8 feet. So the 8-foot mark NAVD 88 is the high tide flooding expected as soon as 2070. The 6.5 feet is high tide expected as soon as 2050. The mean higher high water today is about 1.5 feet. So you can see that, the high tide is really about a foot lower than what the existing elevation on the lowest part of Easy Street is today. It's not shown on here, but so when you're trying to figure out, like, okay, if I'm on Easy Street, is it going to be 8 feet above me? No, it is not. If you're on Easy Street, it's going to be 6.5 feet minus 2.5 feet. So about a 4-foot difference. If we're talking about the 8-foot NAVD 88 design flood elevation, it's going to be 8 feet minus 2.5 feet to get you to about 5.5 feet at existing grade. All right, so project alternatives. This is just an overview of the summary of these 3 alternatives, and then I'll go through each alternative individually and talk more about it. So the first one is the bulkhead expansion and elevation. That is to rebuild the existing bulkhead to be higher and wider. It has some slight road raising, or if you think of like an extended speed hump at Easy Street, the entrance to Steamboat Wharf, and then on South Water Street. The second is called adaptable road raising to 6.5 feet, NAVD 88. So that would raise Easy Street, including the portions of Broad Street and all of the surrounding areas, to 6.5 feet, NAVD 88. There would be small walls along the sidewalks in Easy Street and Old North Wharf area, and in the middle of Broad Street. We'll get into that later. So this idea is really to build at a lower design flood elevation, and then with the intention to increase that design flood elevation in the future when it's needed. The third design option is road raising to 8 feet, NAVD 88, and that would include, again, Easy Street, Broad Street, and then the surrounding roads. There would be larger walls along the sidewalks of these roads as well. So this one is build it now and have it last until at least until 2070. Okay, so each alternative, there'll be a plan view. And then there'll be some 3D models as well to get a better idea of what we're talking about here. The black that you see here, the black numbers, those are the existing grade. The pink numbers are the proposed grade, all related to NAVD 88. This, I guess I'll call it yellow gold line here, indicates the bulkheads. So right now there's essentially 3 different bulkheads in this area, and they're not they let floodwaters in. So bulkheads are really meant to keep the sediment where it is, and it allows water to move back and forth. So replacing the bulkhead with a flood wall would keep the water out of the area, and it would make sure that this is, seamless, that there's no cracks here that would allow the water to come in, which is currently happening today. So flood wall here, it would extend around 29 if permits allow, and then go towards Broad Street. There would be 2 speed humps going into Steamboat Wharf. Essentially, that flood wall would go under those speed humps. It'd come across to Truck Alley between the Nantucket Yacht Club tennis courts and Truck Alley. Right now, there's like a cement kind of shorter wall, so that would be elevated, replaced and elevated, and then it would tie back here. There would be a speed hump on South Water Street, and again on Easy Street, and there would have to be tiebacks on Cambridge Street here. So these speed humps, the intention is to isolate this area and not to allow flanking from either side. Okay, so this is an overview of that with the 3D modeling. Again, the yellow or gold is the flood wall structure. The black is the road raising or the speed hump area. And then this is just showing, there could be opportunities for nature-based solutions within that area. This is looking from up above, going down Broad Street, flood wall area, speed humps. There could be opportunity to redo the sidewalk area and allow for pedestrian access to increase, and then increase the pedestrian access going to the steamship. This is from Broad Street looking out towards Easy Street Park. And I would say these are concepts. So there's no like finishes or anything like that in these pictures. So this is on Easy Street, that speed hump idea. So there would be a little bit of a grade difference between the current sidewalk and that speed hump. This is Broad Street looking down towards Steamboat Wharf. Okay, so Peter, if it's okay to ask these questions, to have a little discussion between the different alternatives, or do you want to save the questions until the end for committee feedback?
Well, we have one more item on the agenda, Joanna's letter. How much time do you think we need for that? And, if we want to do this now, then when do you think we should stop to let the rest of the meeting play out?
Well, I would say that this is pretty time sensitive, and the letter is not as time sensitive. So in my opinion, I think more time should be spent on discussing this project, and the letter could be, either if there's time at the end, or it could be moved to the next agenda.
Okay. All right. Let's do it.
Okay. So start the discussion now.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So at the end of each design alternative, there'll be the same questions. And this is your chance to give feedback on the designs. I'm happy to, go back to some of the pictures if you need to reference them. But we'll start with, what do you like about the bulkhead expansion and elevation? Let me go to the overview so you can see it. Peter, do you want to call on them, or do you want me to?
I will.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Okay, I think Sarah had her hand up first, so I want to be fair. She can go first. And also, I have some general questions about the whole thing. So I don't know how we're gonna do that.
Well, all right, Sarah, you can go first, and I'll go back to Joanna.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. And thank you, Peter, as chair. To answer your question about what I liked, I think the one thing that just struck me right away, whether or not, I have questions about general things, but I like that it is a kind of a longer area. It's not isolating at one property. I think a lot of times previously when we'd seen things, it's like one person will do one thing and, it's kind of piecemeal. And I appreciate that this is obviously the whole area and then also that it incorporates that speed bump to go under the road. I'm interested to see if you have imagery, or Arcadis did this with like what it would look like with flooding. I'm just, I don't know how far you've gone into that visualization piece. But yeah, anyway, those are my 2 cents.
Okay, go ahead, Joanna.
Okay, so just some clarifying things. What was the total amount of the CZM grant?
It was a little under 500,000.
Okay. And then, because I listened to this presentation to the select board, and and I think you may have addressed this at the beginning of this presentation, but I'm not 100% clear on this. What is the role of CRAC in terms of the input we have on this process?
So your role is to give feedback on these designs and, any other input. And then the staff will take that information, also take the feedback from the community, have a discussion in the next couple weeks. And then based on all of that information, we'll put forth a staff recommendation for the select board to discuss and vote on.
And then it would go to the 30% design phase.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess the first question I have with regard to this is, what has been the role of the Steamship Authority in developing any of these plans?
So we've had lots of conversations with the Steamship Authority. I meet with them, I'd say it's probably every 2 months or something. And we've showed them, the 4 conceptual ideas in the beginning, these ones as well, to get their feedback. And we have committed to work together when they start planning their resilience for Nantucket Terminal, to make sure that whatever they do on their property, it can tie into this. So these designs are designed in a way to be able for steamship and, essentially other organizations to be able to tie into them so that there are no quote unquote seams.
Okay, well, because that was a real concern of mine in terms of, it seems premature possibly to do this kind of a project if we don't know what Steamship Authority is going to be doing with their property. And also I would assume that the Nantucket Yacht Club would have to be highly involved in this as well.
Yeah, it's not premature. If you look back at the risk assessment, this area,
That
and
part of it I
yeah,
understand. Yeah.
and steamship they're a higher elevation, so they have more time to deal with, their planning processes. The Nantucket Yacht Club, we've spoken to them too and shared this information with them and got their feedback. They are committed to doing resilient efforts on their property, and they'll be waiting until the steamship figures out them because they share a bulkhead.
And what about, I think, is it the Jepson's house there?
Yep, at 29.
Yeah, so this shows that house still existing. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So that's a private property, and it is, their choice to do whatever they want on their property to make it more resilient. I've had conversations with Matt Jetson, and he came to the virtual open house. They've had their house in their family for a while, and yeah, they rent it out and are there in the summer.
So there's no plans or no ideas I mean, because that house just seems in an odd and difficult location for this plan overall. I mean, similar to the restaurant piece on Easy Street, and it seems that in the ideal world of this type of planning, that neither of those two houses would necessarily, ideally, say, be there, right?
Can
I get what I understand.
I mean, I can't speak on that. It's their option if the town is interested in purchasing it for resilience efforts. But where it stands now, it's either alternative. It doesn't matter if the house is there or not. Like it's not a deal breaker.
Essentially, until the owner decides, hey, I need to play ball.
I know, I understand.
And give, okay.
I understand. I'm just confirming that, you know, we have kind of looked at that because the town has tried to do the Easy Street corner piece through eminent domain at town meeting. I think multiple times they've tried to purchase it. Obviously, none of that has worked out quite yet. So
the town has the option to take 31 Easy Street for eminent domain. That's our last resort. We remain interested in that property if that property owner wants to sell it for resilience efforts and to increase the access to Steamboat Wharf. So
just if I can, tiny piece, if the chair.
Go ahead, Vince.
Thank you, Peter. For 31 Easy, that's the only one where we have an option because of the vote at town meeting last year for taking. But we want to keep it amicable. We don't want to get into a negative scenario of having to go through what would probably be a hostile taking. We're trying to make this work for everyone. There is no such option for 29. There's also the potential that if the town were to have it, we would have a piece of land where we could do something else, but that is not on the table. We're not looking at 29.
So, all right. So now my next question is about the sort of raised, you call them speed bumps. What's the life expectancy of those types of speed bumps?
I would have to get back to you on that. I'm not an expert in paving or anything like that. So.
Okay.
But I will say that these projects are designed to bring us to at least the year 2070.
The year 2070. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Joanna. Go ahead, Tim.
Yes, I like this. What I like about this is that for the most part, the street stays down at building level, so you don't have a big drop off as you would when you raise the road. But my question is, it was kind of referred to by Chuck earlier. Is it possible that the harbor water, when it gets to be high tide and it's up against the barrier, will find its way through the sand and up into the yards of these buildings and so on? Is there any engineering evidence about that?
Yep. So you bring up a good point. So this one does not, I guess, protect against groundwater table rise. So that is still a potential option, or not option, but there is potential for that to happen if this is built.
Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Christy.
Thanks, Peter. Lauren, well, I get a few questions. The first is, does any of these models reflect the different elevation between Broad Street and the truck parking area for the steamship just to the right of it? It doesn't seem like it does, but
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
the elevation of Broad Street.
Yep.
And then just to the right of it, if you're driving up into town, the steamship property, the truck parking area with a
Yes, that's higher elevation there.
It is, but does this does it reflect it? Do any of these models reflect that?
Yes, so there, if we go, when we go into the road raising one, it'll show that, I don't have the existing condition, maybe it's in this one. No, so it'd keep the width. It doesn't show we do have the elevation of that truck
Okay.
alley.
Okay.
But that
And then
is,
also, all right.
Yep.
Does the, are these, so this model, would this be a building block on, say, the next 2, 3, and 4 models? What I'm getting at is, are we building a ramp where we have to build another one on top of it? And, you know, it just seems like we're going to be duplicating a lot of costs and financial implication if you're just doing things twice instead of it being sort of an interlocking sort of project where we're basically building building blocks on one another. But I just also think that at this level, under certain circumstances, you may still get flooding, and that maybe these first few models might be a little futile, or maybe we're past that. And I get, you know, to Tim's point where, you know, you don't want to have drop-offs from the get-go, but I also don't want, you know, just thinking about the financial implications.
yeah, so each, I should say this one and the 8-foot road raising, they essentially have the same level of protection, but this one does not protect up against groundwater table rise. This one could be, so the flood wall is at 8 feet here, so that's for high tide flooding as soon as 2070. If, you know, in let's say theoretically in 2060, we're seeing groundwater table rise, it's still flooding the road, then this could be elevated to 8 feet. So this could be, this is designed in a way that it could be adaptable if we need it to be to road raising.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
And then just my last comment. I don't know, it might, because these are all so close. I know, Leah, you want some sort of guidance on each model. It might be easier if we just hear each model then, because I think we're going to be asking questions that are answerable in the next few models.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you for bringing that up. I was going to suggest that when these questions finish.
Okay. Matt, do you still have a question?
I'll hold it till we get through everything, and then I'll have some comments. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll get through the other 2 design options, and then at the summary page, that's when I'll ask for feedback about what you like and what you don't like about the designs. All right. Okay, so this one is now the adaptable road raising to 6.5 feet NAVD 88, and then in the future could be brought up to that 8-foot NAVD 88 elevation. So again, the pink is the proposed grades and the black is the existing grades. So this shows that Easy Street is elevated, Broad Street is elevated, and then portions of, you know, Oak Street, Cambridge, Old North Wharf, Still Dock, all of those roads coming into Easy Street would have to be regraded and slightly elevated. This shows that we already discussed 31 Easy Street, but this could be a potential, if the town does acquire, it could be a potential location for a stormwater pumping station. This one keeps the width of Truck Alley because when we spoke to, they actually all keep the width of Truck Alley. When we spoke to the Steamship Authority, they said that that width needs to stay so that 3 trucks can park there with that 38-foot width. Okay, so this is looking as an overview. Again, the black is the road road raising portions. This is showing this yellow piece here. That's really just showing that the road essentially is the flood barrier, so that it allows access during certain storm events and tides to get to the steamship and other portions of downtown. Again, from the steamship, looking up Broad and over to Easy Street. This is showing for Easy Street Park. There would be a grade difference, so access into that park would have to be updated. So this is when you start to really see the difference of the existing grade and the 6.5 feet NAVD 88. So at the corner of Easy and Broad Street, you can see that the sidewalk there and the road would be about a 3-foot difference. There will have to be some sort of safety guardrails between the road and pedestrians. And then that delta is, again, 3 feet or so if you're in the area where the Dreamland is, going up to the road. It does show that on the water side, the sidewalk is at grade with the road. This is at Broad Street looking towards Steamboat Wharf. So that intersection would be elevated. Chrissy, to answer your question, the grade for Truck Alley would remain as is. And then the sidewalk area would have to be reconfigured. So it would slope down towards the buildings, and there would have to be stormwater infrastructure in here so that the rainwater is not just, flowing directly into those businesses. Okay, so that is the adaptable road raising. So again, that is you build to 6.5 feet today, which with the current sea level rise projections and using the Massachusetts coastal flood risk model would get us to that mean higher high water as soon as 2050. And then in the future, you could elevate that road more. Christy, I see your hand up. Do you need a clarifying question?
I don't. I'm just in the queue for when
Okay.
we're ready.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so now this is the road raising to 8 feet. As Bill says, it's ripping off the Band-Aid. Essentially, it's the same, same thing, same models that you're going to see with the 6.5 feet NAVD 88, but this is raising to 8 feet. It would have to raise a little bit of Truck Alley to get up to that 4 feet grade that is existing there. Again, an overview. Black is the road raising, so all of the roads coming into Easy Street and Broad Street would need to be raised. The structures themselves, there's no town bylaw or regulation that says if we go with this, all of these structures need to get elevated. That is private properties decisions to do it, or if they're substantially updating their house, they need to come up to code. So they would have to be elevated in the flood zone. What else is there? This also creates essentially pockets of stormwater to accumulate. So the stormwater infrastructure would have to be significantly updated to be able to accommodate these kind of pools of stormwater that would potentially happen in these pockets. Again, looking from Steamboat Wharf down towards Broad Street and Easy Street. And then at the corner of Broad Street and Easy Street, now that difference from the existing grade to the top of the road is about 4.5 feet. At Dreamland, that is about 4.5 feet difference. And so pedestrian access would have to be rerouted and, specific areas cited so that people could get from one side of the road to the other if it's not at specific intersections. Also, the private property driveways would have to be elevated as well to, so that they could remain. This is the intersection of Broad and South Water looking towards Steamship. Again, essentially the same as 6.5 view, but this is the 8-foot view. Okay, so those are the three. We've got the bulkhead expansion and elevation, the adaptable road raising to 6.5 feet NAVD 88, and the road raising to 8 feet. Some of the attractors for the bulkhead expansion, it rebuilds and expands the bulkhead to provide consistent line of flood protection, which we currently don't have right now. It's designed to long-term level of protection. So again, out to at least to 2070. It minimizes disruption to private properties on Easy and Broad Street. So they don't have to, their access to their homes and their driveways is unimpeded. The detractors does not mitigate from future groundwater impacts on the road, and it may require reconstruction of Easy Street Park. The middle design, the adaptable road raising, it addresses the groundwater impacts on the road. It includes opportunities to reconfigure pedestrian access, and it's a lower level of protection is less disruptive to abutting parcels. The detractors requires adaptation in the future. Road raising requires reconfiguration access to the private and public properties and the abutting roads, and it requires redesign of access to Easy Street Park. The road raising to 8 feet, basically the same as the previous one, and the detractors are essentially the same as the previous one. So I'll leave it on this slide right now to get your feedback on what you like and what you don't like for each of the alternatives.
Okay, go ahead, Christy.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Leah. Appreciate it. I've got three questions. I'll just ask them all at once, and then you can answer. The first question is, how do they accommodate sewer lines and stormwater infrastructure with these road raisings, as well as other utilities that are maybe located on the road? My other question is, for this last model, road raising to 8 feet, I'd love to see those extensions up, Oak Street, Cambridge Street, maybe come up to South Water Street, because I do know that water does get up there. I'm wondering why they maybe didn't continue those up to South Water Street, considering they did it on Broad Street. And then my last question, Leah, was you had mentioned in that last little bit the responsibility of the private homeowners. I know one for maybe bringing their driveways up to grade of some sort or parking area, but there was something else you said about, is it raising the property itself? And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Vince, I might need help with the first question about the utilities in the road raising alternatives, but I think the stormwater would need to be all reworked for this road raising to incorporate, one, a pump station, and two, the pockets that it forms, like in this area, and this area. And then as far as the other utilities in the road, would those have to be brought up too, Vince?
There's a question on that one that we heard during the first open house, and the answer at the time was yes. We were looking at potentially raising those so that they would be accessible and not, you know, in groundwater over time and getting degraded. So the let's think about it like whatever's buried under there, not just stormwater. There's other things like sewer mains and water lines and what have you. They may also have to get raised so that they're not buried an extra 3 to 4 feet down under utilities. There was also an idea that would probably get worked in past the 30% design, where you might have specific ducts to be able to access these types of utilities so that they'd be more readily accessible and you wouldn't have to go dig the roads, so to speak, to be able to access them. All things that can be worked in, but also the kind of things that you get to after 30%.
Thanks, Vince. Christy, I can't remember your second question, but to answer your third question, as far as the private property owners, so as far as them tying, you know, their driveways into the elevated roadways, I don't know at this point if that would be, you know, if they would have to pay for that, or if that be some sort of like betterment, or if there was a grant for that, or I don't know. We're not at that point right now. Again, that's something that gets hashed out after the 30%. And as far as them elevating their properties, that is their own option if they want to do it preemptively. If they do update their property, if they have substantial improvements, which is 50% of their value of their house, not their land, just their house, then they have to bring that up to code. And through the Massachusetts Building Code, they would have to elevate their home to the proper elevation that FEMA has on their maps.
Got it. Really quickly. Yeah, sorry, Vince. Really, just Leah, my second question was maybe why the model didn't bring Oak Street and Cambridge Street up to South Water Street like it did on Broad Street with the road raising.
Oh, okay. So that is that's because for the flooding, you don't necessarily need to raise Oak Street going up. And then South Water Street, it's still raised, but it then dips down. So that would be essentially I don't want to call it a flood wall, but it would reduce the flanking from South Water Street. So you don't necessarily like, also that's out of the project's area. And so would that have to be elevated in the future? Potentially. But that it's not within our project. So it's really easy to be like, oh, we should extend that this way and this way and that way. But then you're creeping and you're out of the project area. So you have to kind of have a strong boundary.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Leah. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks. What I like is that we're thinking ahead, we're looking ahead, and we're trying to sort of figure out what to do. I left the meetings with some concerns though. My family no longer owns property down there. I grew up down there as a kid working, and so I know the area really well. I worry that we're building a bathtub, and if people don't raise their homes, or their businesses, they're all going to be impacted. I think that that we should be giving direction to them to what height this is going to be. So that people can start thinking about it as we move along. I worry that we are a little myopic, that should we be drawing the line at the corner of Easy Street, or should the line be, at South Water Street or North Water Street? Like, should everything toward the water be recommended to be higher and more ability for water to flow or store? Should those roads be heavy duty boardwalks that all the utilities are attached underneath so those could move up over time? I just think that we should be thinking a little bit more macro on this than maybe we are right now. And maybe that's all been done and I don't understand it. But I think there's also, I always talk about how, you in order to go back, you have to stop going forward. I worry that we are building this for vehicles, that we are assuming that, you know, to add 200 vehicles a year, you know, which is what we're adding, and that, you know, but at the same time, we're losing roads. We're going to have less roads, and we're saying, oh, so they can park their car. They're going to be in a flood zone. And, you know, so I think like we have to start thinking, how else can we transport people around the island when we lose 20, 30, 40 miles of roads, plus the, you know, plus the parking on those streets like in Brant Point, plus people's driveways. You know, is it boardwalks going to with, you know, that people can drive golf carts on? You know, is there some other way? You know, is Brant Point, are people going to pay for their own houses and build, you know, and build them up and have polders so the water runs through all the way to the base of the cliff? You know, I think those types of issues have to be done. Is the steamship, is the steamship going to determine that this is the best and only place to be? Or are they going to say, hey, we can bring, you know, we can bring people, not cars, to these areas, but we're going to bring trucks and cars over somewhere else. I don't know where that is. I just think we need a little bit more imagination and a little bit more of a micro view. And then once we have that, and I'm not confident we're there yet, but once we, you know, once we have that, including like how transportation, et cetera, then I think that we should be doing, you know, sort of like like Jen did last night, like we should be doing meetings, not just talking about how, you know, how the world is ending, which it isn't, but, you know, not all negative, and they joked about it, so I'm joking, but also here's the vision. We should be sharing, like after this meeting, you know, I've seen this a couple times now, and after it, I went and looked at all the Envision presentations, because I was like, we need some more. I'm like, how else can we handle this? I think we're thinking about this from the perspective, like a myopic perspective of, well, cars have to do it. We have to have cars, and we have to drive all the way down, and we have to park right next to the boat because that's the way we do things. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to think how we really want to be doing things in 30 years, 20 years, 30 years, and start working toward that, and then start selling that. Because when you look at some of the Envision pictures, it's amazing. The people the people down at Brant Point, it would be an amazing place to live. Even if you couldn't drive a big suburban to it, it would still be a beautiful home looking, you know, raised, overlooking the beautiful harbor, marshlands underneath you. You know, on days with on low tide, you'd have a beautiful beach down the street. I mean, there's all these things that are positives, and you know, and I have this feeling when I look at Mattocket too. We have all these raised roads going to Mattocket, but they're going to nowhere. They're roads to a bunch of lowland that, you know, what are people going to do? You know, so I think it's great, but I think, you know, so I'm trying to figure out how do we move it into a, you know, the next phase. Thanks.
Can I respond to that, please, Peter?
Okay, just bear in mind, Vince, we have 9 minutes left. And given at the last meeting, we weren't able to make quorum and everyone's busy. So I've got Joanna, Jen, Gary, and Leah, and you who all want to say something. Are we going to go beyond 12 o'clock?
I will be as fast as I can.
Okay.
So, Peter, thank you for that. And Matt raises a lot of very good points and sage points, but we have to sometimes take small baby steps and stay within our lane. Talking about Brant Point and Mattocket, all very much needed areas to fix as well. However, this is the funded project we're working within to get to 30% design. That's what we're working with. We're working with the best available information for flooding and sea level rise information. We have spoken to the Steamship Authority. They have said they are committed to that area. I see no reason to second guess what the Steamship Authority wants to do for their property. They've said they're staying where they are. So that's the design parameters we're working within. If we get beyond the 30% design and the select board want to add funding to look at other areas going up Oak Street onto other streets, so be it. But that's not what we are and where we are in the function of this area and this project. There's a lot of issues on this island. What we do need is consensus on this one project and this one set of designs before us so that we can move forward. Mission creep is a thing that we always have to be aware of. There is a lot of need. This is the need we're addressing right now. Thank you, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Vince. Go ahead, Joanna.
Peter, sorry, can I respond to Matt too? And then I'll take my hand down.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, and it's for the rest of the committee too. So I highly recommend you reread the downtown section, downtown and Brant Point section of the Coastal Resilience Plan. So that plan is what we're implementing right now. That's what most of you helped develop, 4 years ago to get us to the future. As far as, I don't think we're, putting vehicles on a high pedestal. It's people need to get to their properties, and emergency access needs to be accessible. So getting to the steamship authority, that's an evacuation route. We need to have people be able to do that. We need to have fire, police, ambulances, all of that get to the downtown area, get to the steamship terminal if they need to. As far as parking, that's not part of this project. It is purely access and to reduce our risk. And the Envision Resilience, great, but none of those have worked within the permitting, the permitting, all the permits that we have in Massachusetts. So it was really a great way to think outside the box. But as far as actually implementing and getting it permitted in reality, it doesn't take that into consideration. So that is a big point to think about. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Leah. Go ahead, Joanna.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with, Matt's perspective. I also think that Leah is right. And Vince are right. We have to start somewhere, right? And I think that the most important thing over the next 50 years is making sure that trucks and emergency vehicles can get to and from the island as easily as possible. And I'm going to say that I really like option 3, road raising to 8 feet immediately, because I think it provides direction to the rest of the community around how they can adapt to the plan. And I have sat in 15 meetings over the last 3 years with other executive directors in downtown business locations who need the information in order to plan for their organizations. So if you look at number 3 and you know that the road's going to go up 8 feet and where it's going to extend into, then places like the Dreamland and like the NHA can then take that information and prepare their organizations for the next 50 and 100 years. And so the closer we can get to clarity around at least the 50-year fix, right, then the business community and the owners of all those private places can start to incorporate that thinking into how they develop plans for their businesses. And I think that if we're going to go to the trouble of doing this work and absorbing the expense, ripping the Band-Aid off is the way to go. So thank you.
Thanks, Joanna. Jen?
Thanks, Pete, and thanks, Leah. This was the kind of second time I listened to this, and some of the, the comments and thoughts that I had, I think I really kind of gravitated towards the middle solution here, just because it wasn't as aggressive as the last one, and I thought more likely potentially to get the kinds of approval that you're looking for, but gives a little bit of that longer term adaptation and addresses the groundwater impacts on the roadways, which I think is really important to think about. Some of the kind of issues that I still have, though, were that even though the kind of nature-based shoreline solutions are called out in this versus the first time, it's really just as an afterthought, and I'm not really seeing it incorporated into the adaptations on the roadways. I've seen some pretty interesting and significant kind of wastewater, groundwater movement that's subsurface in road systems, where you're then building it into wetlands that are built into the roads or adjacent to the roads. I'd like to see a little more from the consultant's thought on those nature-based sides of things. I do think with the elevation, I mean, where we're controlling groundwater, stormwater runoffs on the road and on the water side, but all of those businesses landward of the road are going to become areas that water is puddling and ponding. And so if the town is taking this on, it's going to be interesting to see what the reaction is of the property owners and if that's considered a taking on their property because we're adjusting the road adjacent to them. So I just think that's something for us to be careful and think about. And then I had made a comment in one of the sections looking at it that it really does, the way it's structured with the walkway on the water side being elevated, but on the upland side being lowered, it really cuts off that part of town from the water. It cuts off the sidewalk from the water. It changes that interaction with the road and the water surface, and thinking that the sidewalk at least needs to be raised on that side so it's road level, and then some of those crosswalks and connections just to keep that flow in and across that roadway so we're not completely cutting off the other side there. And I think that's the gist of what I had.
Thank you, Jen. Go ahead, Gary.
I just have two comments. First, with respect to this particular choice, the only concern I have on the raising is that what it does to the private homeowners who are on the streets that aren't being raised. And I don't know if we've done enough research or we understand what happens to all of the private homes that are on the streets near and around where other roads are being raised. And that's my only concern about raising, whether it's 6.5 or 8 feet. That's one comment. The second comment I have is at the beginning of this presentation, there was a comment about the stormwater management. And the thought I have there is that I'm very concerned. We've been talking about the fact that we need to do something, that the stormwater that is flushing itself all the way down the hill and is exacerbating the problems down where we're talking about. And our committee really isn't in charge of stormwater management. I know the sewer department or Charlie Johnson, someone is, but I'm very disappointed. I don't see anything really substantive happening to deal with those alternatives. There are several alternatives mentioned. Leah showed us them at the beginning of this presentation of things that should be done, but I don't know if who's pushing those plans to get changes made, because the more we fix that stormwater management problem, the lesser will be the impact that we're talking about on this area. Those are my two comments.
All right, thanks, Gary. Are there any other comments? Vince and Leah want to respond to any of the comments that we've just had?
Yeah, I can talk about the stormwater piece. So Charles has been in lots of these meetings about this project. And so you're right, the sewer department stormwater division is in charge of all the stormwater. They're right now really investigating what our stormwater system is and where do the pipes go and how do they look and are they cracked? Are they pitched the wrong way? Which lots of them are. So once that assessment is complete and they have a really good understanding of the infrastructure that we have now, then they can make changes. So we're just, we're not there yet. But with that being said, stormwater upgrades will have to happen with any of these alternatives, and there will have to be a pump station somewhere, in the downtown area to accommodate that stormwater collection.
Thanks, Leah. Matt?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the stormwater. Yeah, I think we aren't there yet. I sent from Charleston, South Carolina, they did Dutch dialogues, and one of their things that they figured out was that the stormwater, they had to start at high ground, and they had to start storing and diverting from the higher areas first, and that by doing that, they were saving money when they had to build out the lower areas. And it kind, when they had pictures of, catch basins under the roads at high ground and diverting into wetlands that were at high grounds, et cetera, so that then when they had to do the work on the lower grounds, it was, more affordable, and, they had less that they had to use electricity and et cetera to pump out. So hopefully we will get to that level of detail once they get where we are now. And I think that's, that would be a good thing. And then I realize that we are not, I realize we're talking about this specific area, and I'm not going into the others. I think I just want, my real thing is like, did we consider, we're going to hold the line somewhere, and we're going to raise, where do we hold the line? Is this the right place to hold the line? And I'm not saying we don't access the steamship, but do we access it by raising everything and coming from South Water down instead of having Easy Street? Should Easy Street in Washington, anyway, like, I just want to make sure that we've examined those options. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Comment, please, Peter.
Go ahead, Vince.
Right. For Matt's second comment, totally agree and understand. We have looked at it, and we did look at options before we got to these points. For his first comment, for the drainage, Leah, you're gonna have to help me here for a second. I can't remember, is it 53 or 58 acres?
53.
53 acres of land drain into this area. Everything from the top end, but the middle end of Main Street, from around Fair Street to over on Center Street. All the water from the catch basement that far upland comes down. When we looked at how we might try and slow water and looked at the drainage network in that area, it's another problem. It really is. And that's something that the sewer department is working, the stormwater department is working quite diligently on. So when you're looking at ways to fix stormwater where we've historically not done the best work, and it's in some of the most expensive real estate in the country, in historic cobblestone streets, then you got problems. So yes, Matt and Gary, there's a lot to resolve in this, but once you understand some of the area and the issues at play that drain to this area, that's what we're looking at for a start to try and to see how can we resolve. Thank you.
Thanks, Vince. Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks. I just have one quick comment. As far as the rerouting of, vehicles into this area, we looked at that, and, South Water Street and Easton Street, and those are still in flood zones. So something like this would still have to happen if, we shut down Easy Street and abandon it, which the community does not want. So that's important to note. And then I lost track of my other thing. So that's it.
Okay. I've just taken the luxury of listening to everybody speak and taking it all in. And my thoughts are, I agree with Joanna about the third option. I mean, if we go with the first or the second, we're eventually going to have to go up to the third or even higher. It's critical that we have access to the Steamship Authority, as has been said, or we're going to do what Dave Franzuto is proposing, a alternative pier at the West Jetty. And I don't know how feasible that is, or if we ever want to even attempt that, but we need the roads for people to get to the Steamship Authority. And yes, I hear, what do we tell the private property owners in the area? I hope by picking this option, or if we have to pick the middle one and that's what we decide, that they hear us loud and clear. Water's coming, we're building up, you should build up too. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that higher here is better, and that of course the drainage has to be solved before we go forward. So go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, after seeing all three options, I'm leaning more towards the center. And while I do think that the 8 feet seems more necessary in this area, I want to actually think about what's likely to get approved and passed and work through with our town. I know that's not the best idea or the way to go about things all the time, but I think that the center, raising the road both is feasible now, or doable now, does protect us, kind of has that groundwater component of protecting a little bit more from rising groundwater. It also seems maybe a little more aesthetically pleasing, and that's once again not a reason to pick something, but I think as we think through a project, what's the feasibility and what's the likelihood? There's of course the is it functional piece, but we have to recognize that this is in a very central downtown area, and what is our community value? Yes, they want to be protected, and that's our job, but it's also part of the community. So an area where we can have more nature-based solutions, continue the aesthetic of Easy Street Park, which people love, providing that functionality of that raised road. I think that center option is more doable. We also have to consider that this is early stages, as in the sense of two things. Like Leah mentioned, this was one of the highest priorities in the CRP, so it's one of the first things we're doing. And so we want it to be a project people can get behind, because as a committee, we're going to have a harder time, supporting more projects in the future if we start with something that, people aren't supportive of. But then as Leah just put this up, the next steps, we're really in that preliminary design phase. I'm interested to see, okay, if we pick an option, like maybe the center option, then as it's going through more full design, we can see more of the modeling of like where the sea level rise will go, kind of more details, where some of the questions that are coming up are very viable, but will, as I'm assuming, be teased out more in those next phases. So I'm all for the 6-foot road elevation.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Go ahead, Christy.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, just a quick comment. I had to step off for Joanna's comment, so I'm not sure what she said, so I apologize if I duplicate. But as far as option 8, I think the longer that you delay that model, you're really talking hundreds of millions more to do these projects. Obviously, we all know the sooner we do things, it will be cheaper. And I think that it would prepare us better. And I do think that the growing pains that we are talking about with the private sector and all those businesses would better be suited. Now, I understand this is a long timeline and pretty major, but these are big discussions, even for something like the first model, and to do the first model and then talk about the second and then the third. I think that you're just talking major expenses and further bigger discussions when you could have a model that is well prepared for anything that any sort of event that happens. With that said, that's a big, huge commitment, and you really got to make sure that is the right decision. So it really, really has got to be vetted, but that's sort of where I'm leaning. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Christy. Are there any more comments from staff and from the committee members? Okay, seeing none, are there members of the public who would like to comment? Okay, seeing no comments. Do you think it's worthwhile continuing the discussion, Leah, at the next meeting? Has everybody got to say what they wanted to say? Do you want to take 2 weeks to look at the options and look at the presentation and then talk some more? Not seeing a lot of heads nodding, so all right. We'll obviously get to Joanna's letter at the next meeting. And you have something to say under item number 8, Joanna? I'm sorry, Leah.
Nope, I already gave that in the presentation, so we're good.
Okay. So I just gotta say at number 8, new business committee and natural resources department reports, planning board, Concom, SHAB, select board, advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers. Are there any reports from any of these representatives? Christie? You're on mute. You're on mute, Christie.
Sorry about that. Peter, if I may, I just want to ask Leah if she was able to get some good information from that discussion from us. Are you in a good place now, or do you need a lot more from us on the discussion?
No, I think those are all really great comments and questions. So yeah, I'm satisfied. But happy, if the committee wants to chat about it more, happy to do that on the April 8th meeting.
Okay, Gary.
Thanks, Peter. I just have one general comment, which I really meant for Leah and for Vince. I don't know if Vince is still on, I guess not. And that is when I think about not just this particular project, but all of the projects that have been being worked on by our committee and by independent groups, we are spending a ton of money starting to deal with coastal resiliency. And I think it might be a good thing for Leah and Vince to put together, start to figure out how much we have already been investing, because to the extent that they are appearing before different civic groups or committees, it would be good to be able to say, we've already invested millions, and we have, I'm sure, more than $1 million, maybe a few $1 million, based on looking at the grants we've gotten, the money we spent to Arcadis, the stuff the land bank is doing. So it's really good that the fact that the town of Nantucket has really started to put its mouth where its money where its mouth is, and we're doing the right thing. But it might be a good thing to have those numbers available, so when you talk to public groups, they know that we are investing in the future. That's just my thought.
Thank you very much, Gary. Leah?
Yeah, that's a good point, Gary. I'm actually going to be presenting at the Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers on April 5th. So could be a good opportunity to share that information. Vince had to run, so he apologizes. He had another meeting.
Thanks, Leah. Go ahead, Joanna.
I just want to make sure that we can deal with that letter at the next meeting sort of first, because if we want to act on any of this, we need to make sure that the select board has time to read and digest the letter, and that anything that we want to move on can be considered for the town meeting in the fall.
Yes, definitely. We'll make sure when we do our agenda meeting that we'll put that at the top.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, guys, if there's nothing else, our next meeting is April 8th on Zoom. I hope we can all make it. But if there's nothing else, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Gary, seconded by Joanna. Roll call vote. Joanna Roach.
Aye.
Gary Beller.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Dave Iverson.
Aye.
Sarah Boyce.
Aye.
Christy Kickham.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you, everybody, for a great discussion.